Mary Freeman New Right Network. You've joined us for our new series for Town Hall. This is the second of our series, and we are with Luke Negron. He is running for the seat in Pennsylvania's 18th district. Luke Negron is a 27-year-old. He's the only Republican on the ballot. That is pretty cool. And he is also still serving in the United States Air Force for Pennsylvania. Luke, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Hello, Mary. Yeah, it's great to be here. Great to be sharing with the citizenry of Pennsylvania and of the United States. And so the brief history summary for me is January 10th, 2020. I came off of an activation with the PA Air Guard, serving with the United States Air Force, came off of orders, and by February 18th of 2020, the Negron team had become established as the only Republican candidacy out of a field of 5 Republicans, all of whom were older than myself, all of whom had a longer period to establish themselves than we had, and I'm so proud of my team, proud of what we've done. Now we are the only Republican candidacy on the ballot in PA 18. We're looking to reclaim politics for the citizenry of Western PA.
Wonderful. And Luke, you are a young man. What made you feel the need to join in politics and that? And what did you feel like you could bring as a young man? Yeah.
So a few things. Number one, most recently, would be that I saw young leaders on the left. I saw Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who I think has terrible ideas, who I think is largely anti-American, as is Ilhan Omar, another young leader on the left. But nonetheless, they're influential. They are there leading the charge for the leftists and the progressives. And then I looked at the right side of the aisle and I said, where are the young leaders in the right side of the aisle conservative movements? The left has Greta Thunberg, who's 17 years old, I believe, perhaps recently turned 18. We've got extremely young leaders influencing the world because the world is now looking for relevant leadership who have grown up in this new reality that we live in, new technology, new societal expectations. We've seen society change globally just in the last couple months due to COVID-19. We need people who understand what people go through today as citizenry, and that comes to young leaders. And then specific to me, why am I here? I'd say that the broad answer in a word is legacy. I care about my own legacy. How did I spend my time? How did I spend my talents? But then I care about the legacy of the United States, which I see is under attack. I see that our great leaders like Washington and Hamilton and Madison, they're being undercut. Their ideas are being sold out by our government, by our elites. And sadly, these elites are Republicans and Democrats. It's not just Democrats. And they're selling out the American dream, American values, and American liberties. And again, we can get into this later, but we see that magnified amid the COVID-19 crisis. We see these liberties being stripped away. So the legacy of the United States and how my own legacy can work alongside that is kind of the broad answer there.
So let's get into that, though. Let's get into how you feel or what you think, because a lot of people are calling moves like the things that Gretchen Whitmer is doing, the things that Bill de Blasio is doing, the things that Governor Cuomo is doing, Governor Newsom is doing. This is called, more often than anything else, it's called a power grab.
That's right.
What do you think about that? How do you feel? And how do you assure your voters that you aren't going to turn around and do the same thing? Because the swamp is the swamp. It's Republican and Democrat, right?
That's right. That's right. Well, I think, number one, I want to speak out, as I have done in recent history, very vocally to disown these sellout leaders. Like, we've got the de Blasios in New York, Gavin Newsom in California. They're speaking in very militant terms to the citizenry of their districts and of their states. They're saying things like, final warning, enough is enough. Now we're going to have the cops crack down on in New York on Jewish funerals and religious practices, or in California, no one's going to the beach now because no one could listen to me in all of my, Gavin Newsom's infinite wisdom. No one listens. So now enough is enough. It's this very militant, tyrannical, localized idea of an authoritarian overstepping and, like you said, power grabbing, using this COVID-19 crisis as their excuse. I think it's disgusting. And then as to what I would do to make sure that I hold myself accountable, the number one promise I have for the citizenry of Western PA is that in the first year that I am in office representing us in the U.S. House, I am going to either pen or directly support policy for term limits. And I believe that this is something that we need to speak out in favor for consistently. And if that's not something that I do, then you will know that I have become what I hate, that I have become the swamp. That's not ever what I'm going to do, but that's my promise, is that in the first year, there's no reason for elected officials to turn a blind eye to the need for term limits. We see people abusing their power for decades on end. We see politicians who got into power in the 80s and 90s who can't hope to relate to the working class today. That's a real problem. It's one that I am directly going to support fixing.
So you have seen the House of Representatives specifically roadblock President Trump in everything that he does. Mm-hmm. Go to the media with all sorts of stuff, including flat out lies. Can you reassure your citizenry that that's not going to happen with you, that you're America first, and that you're going to work with this president?
Absolutely. And you know what? And this is something that I know you and I have discussed prior to this. And it's that as a member of the U.S. House, my responsibility is first to District 18, to Western PA, Pittsburgh, and the South Hills, but also to the American people, because the House is a federal position. You're passing policy that will impact Americans, your brothers and sisters across the nation. So this is something that we need to be held accountable for. We need this citizenry to be working with the president. And as a member of the U.S. House, your job is to work with the president. Your job is to seek the betterment of America as a whole. Sadly, we haven't done that. Sadly, we see that in the first 2 years of Donald Trump's presidency, he had a Republican majority. And what did they do? They did nothing. They acted antagonistic towards him. That was a real shame to see. And we had some great movements in the past decade or so, the Tea Party movement. And then, of course, in 2016, the Trump movement. And we saw the citizenry of the United States rise up and elect who they thought were on their side, Republican insiders. But a lot of those Republicans ended up being sellouts. That's a real problem. So we've got some great Republican leaders, but there are some real problems within the system that we see, and we need to hold them accountable to demand transparency in politics. That as leaders, you are in touch with your constituency, with the citizens around you, and that you're being open with them about why you vote, how you vote, and how those votes are going to impact the American people.
And that's another reason for term limits. I'm going to go to a question here. I have a question by Robert B. He wants to know, he says, Luke, how are you going to counter all the union support for Mike Doyle? So this is a question specifically for the people of Western Pennsylvania. Luke, how are you going to counter all the union support for Mike Doyle, your possible opponent?
That's right. Yeah. So for those who don't know, Mike Doyle, currently the incumbent of 25 going on 26 years, very likely going to win the Democratic primary against socialist Gerald Dickinson. Both of them are bad news, and they share a lot in common, actually. Doyle has become increasingly radical in recent years. But so let's talk a little bit about unions here. Unions, in my mind, are like any other power structure. They can be good and they can be bad. Unions were founded for good reason, because working class citizens needed some kind of representation against these corporations who inherently had more money, more time, more power on their side. So unions have a place. They certainly do. But just like any power structure, they can be corrupted. So we need to speak out in favor of good unions and against unions who use their power for corruption and coercion. It's very simple. And then when it comes to speaking to the unions of Western PA specifically, I'd just say this. If we look at some of these socialist policies, the Green New Deal, for instance, which Mike Doyle and Dickinson have both supported, this is something that is threatening your jobs. It's threatening to gut the energy production and the parts that you produce for energy production. It's threatening to gut the ability for America to have an energy independence. And a lot of that hinges on Pennsylvania and Western PA as a region. So it's your jobs on the line. And then beyond that, what a lot of unions have done is they've traded away higher wages in favor of getting better packages for them and their families, better health care packages, better benefits. If we go with a centralized single payer health care system like Obamacare, well, all of those benefits that you and your union fought for, they go away because now it doesn't matter because everyone gets on the government health care. So that great Cadillac benefit that you fought for years and that you and your fellow union members have strived to get, it doesn't matter all of a sudden. So there are some real reasons for unions to stop and assess their situation and say, wait a second, the Democrats might not be on our side here.
Good point. I'm going to ask a question now from Brendan S. And his question, Luke, is a two-part question. So we can focus on each of those parts. So, hey, Luke, my question is currently, what is the biggest issue concerning Pittsburgh constituents, and how do you plan to combat that issue? So address what you feel is the biggest issue concerning Pittsburgh constituents, and then we can go into what you feel you can do to alleviate those problems.
Oh, there's a lot that we could say here. And I'm going to name a few issues, then I'm going to really dive into in depth in one. So one is the jobs that we kind of just hit on with the unions. They're under threat, right? The Obama war on coal, the war on energy, the war on energy independence, which Peduto and Doyle have taken part in. Those are problems for the families of Pittsburgh who just want to provide. They just want to live the American dream and be left alone. Another problem that we see is the drug epidemic. Most of us know someone who has suffered from addiction or overdose. That's a real problem. And I have ideas on all of these. But right now, what I want to get into is a more overarching umbrella idea that trickles down and affects all of these policy issues. And it's simply relationship with your localized leaders, with the people who you elected to represent you and your district on a national level. So my question to the citizenry of Western PA is this. Before I said his name, did you even know that Mike Doyle was your representative and had been your representative for the last quarter century, for 25 going on 26 years? Did you know anything that Mike Doyle has done for you or anything that he's passionate about and that he comes out and communicates with you as the citizenry of his district? My guess is the answer to both of those is no. We didn't know. We didn't know who he was because he's a do-nothing guy. We didn't know what he's passionate about, and he doesn't seem to care. And the truth is, why would he care? He's a career politician. He's been in power for 20 plus years. He has the ability to protect his power. So there's no reason for him to work hard and to come to you and to talk to you and build a relationship with you. So the number one issue I see that affects all these other issues is transparency and relationship in politics. Your localized elected officials, your civil servants should actually be civil servants. Someone who does this really well out of Texas is Dan Crenshaw. He goes and votes on a policy issue. Then he comes out and he hops on Facebook Live or onto an interview or onto Instagram, and he tells the citizens of his region what the policy was that he just voted on, how he voted, and how that vote is going to affect them. This is like something that most citizens go, oh my gosh, a representative can do that? Yeah, they can do that. That's the U.S. House used to be called the People's House. We're supposed to have citizen leaders there. You should know exactly what your rep is doing when they run down to Washington and start entering the swamp. That's what I'm going to do. I'm always going to have an open door, always going to be doing things like this and investing in the relationship between the voters and the leadership.
Good. So, just to be clear, you think the overarching issue is the representative himself that's not really working. That kind of seems to be something that's happening nationwide. My question to add on to that then is, how are you going to encourage other young, middle-aged, or whatever leaders, new leaders, how are you going to encourage them to get in on that and say, okay, that's enough, you're done?
Mm-hmm.
Because we've got Nancy Pelosi, we've got all sorts of people in both the House and the Senate, and they've been there for decades. And we need to encourage some people to get in there and to challenge that, to challenge them, and to get them out. So, what can you, Luke, personally do to encourage other young leaders such as yourself?
That's right, Mary. And you know, to summarize, I guess the belief here that I have is that good communication is the key to any relationship, whether it's your friend, your romantic partner, your dad, or your elected official. There better be good communication. Otherwise, that relationship is not going to be beneficial. It's not going to stand the test of time. What can I do? Well, one of the things I can do is what I'm doing right now, is trying to shake it up a bit, trying to get this message out there to encourage other young aspirational leaders to come out and show their merit, show their mettle, and speak out in favor of whatever it is that they're passionate about. You don't have to be silent. You don't have to wait until you're 45, 55 years old. The United States law sets the age of 25 years young to lead in the U.S. House for a reason, because United States law directly recognizes the value of young leadership. So something I would like to do is to speak to other young individuals and encourage them. Don't get beaten down. Don't get discouraged. Come out and share your message. And then to the elected officials, what we can do there, and this comes down through the transparency that I want to bring forward, is air them out. Call them out. Let the citizenry know, hey, this guy, he's not representing you. He does not care. He's been around for 25, 30, 35, 40 years, and he's using his position of power to defend his or her position of power. And let the people then make their own judgments. Let the people be educated on what's going on, take the blinders off a little bit, and kind of, show the man behind the curtain. And I think that when the American people see that, American people don't like sellouts. They don't like hypocrites. That's what they're going to see a lot of. And again, sadly, this is a Republican and Democrat issue. Having an R next to your name does not make you a good guy in my book.
Yeah, good. Okay, I have a question here from Kaylin H. It looks like it's something that is very close to her heart. So let's go ahead and address this. She says, Luke, what do you think is the best plan to help the homeless, and how will you implement that? She says there was a decrease in 2019 of about 300 in your area, but locals do not think that is a very accurate number. What can we change to better impact the homeless?
Yeah. Well, sorry there. Can you still hear me?
Yep, gotcha.
So the first thing I'd say is I always want to be open about when a policy issue is not something that I'm particularly skilled or educated in. And this is one of those issues. I think that too many politicians come out and try to pretend to be experts on everything. Nobody's an expert on everything. And this is an issue that I haven't given enough time or due diligence to speak to exclusively or extensively. However, I can give you a few thoughts. So one is that something I have researched a lot is specifically homeless veterans. A lot of our cities are filled with homeless veterans. I've been, across the United States on my travels, on Air Force orders. Every major city has homeless veterans in it. And a big problem that I have with illegal immigration is we see people wanting to bring in illegal immigrants while we still have our men and women who have fought to defend our country homeless on the streets. So one thing to solve that as it relates to veterans is make sure that every veteran is provided for, has somewhere to stay, has health care, and has food to put in their stomachs before we even start thinking about granting amnesty or accepting illegal immigrants who have never done anything for this country. So there's kind of an order of priorities there, right? It's saying, which policy do we implement first? Well, I say prioritize the homeless veterans. And then as we speak to homeless people as a whole, I think that releasing public education to some of these abilities that we have for homeless people to come to shelters, to come to soup kitchens and food banks and things like that. I've been involved in some food banks during the COVID crisis. There are a lot of food banks around Pittsburgh, and if the homeless individuals are more knowledgeable about exactly where they can go for help, so that they don't feel ashamed, so that they don't feel like they're alone, I think that will help a lot too. So it's education, knowing the options in front of them. Those are a few ideas off the top of my head, and I'd love to talk to some people who are more experienced in that policy issue than myself, because we always want to expand and pay attention to the needs of the region and of the American people as a whole.
Good. John W. says, Luke, would you support increasing funding for DCAA and DCMA, audit divisions of the Defense Department? Lack of oversight is one of, if not the largest area we as a country can save money. Would you support audit division? What he's basically asking is, do you support oversight of government spending?
So, of course, number one, yes, I support oversight of government spending, because I think a lot of government programs are corrupt and or bloated. So sometimes people are just inefficient, and sometimes people are inefficient and nefarious. And we see a lot of that in the government, right? But then when it comes to increasing funding, I'm a little bit trigger shy when it comes to increasing funding, because what that ultimately means is raising taxes, right? Taking taxes from the citizenry of the United States. If we were going to increase funding for oversight, it would have to be a trade deal. So a take from somewhere else where we're cutting funding and then give it to this purpose. Something like that, where we're trading where we're putting our money rather than increasing the burden on the American people. But of course, I think oversight is important, and I'm a big fan of cutting back government entitlements and bloated programs. And most government programs can have some efficiency introduced to their operating procedures. I'm a big fan of that.
Good. You touched on the parts of the next question before. So here's a chance to expand and expound on those. Korak M asks, Luke, how transparent have past administrations been, and what are your opinions on transparency?
Yeah, well, this person sounds like either they're a big fan and they know that I love to talk about transparency, or they've never heard about me and they're like, hey, does this guy even care about transparency? Either way, let's talk about it. Past administrations, that's kind of a broad question. I'd like to hear it kind of whittled down a little bit. So just off the top of my head, let's talk about the past two presidential administrations, right? The Trump leadership and the Barack Obama led presidency. I think Trump has been quite transparent. I know there is a lot of some questions that revolve around his tax returns and things like that. We need to remember, number one, that is something that happened when Trump was a private citizen, not when he was an elected official. I've even heard his tax returns compared to Joe Biden's records from when Joe Biden was in office and when he was an elected official. That's apples and oranges. The records of an elected official are very different than the records of a private citizen. I'm not saying that I don't believe it's a good idea for all records to be transparent, but we need to recognize the differences here. But beyond that, I think Trump has been very open about mistakes he's made in the past. He spoke out openly about apologizing for the infamous Access Hollywood tape, right? And he's not a perfect man, and I think that's what makes us all appreciate him, because none of us are perfect either. There's kind of this shocking thing that happens when you're transparent, and it's when you come out and you say, you know what, I'm a working class, limited human being who's imperfect, just like you. All of a sudden, people say, hey, we can relate to that guy. Like, me too. I'm not perfect. I'm just a working class guy. I've got things I've done that I regret. And it kind of makes you more endearing and more admirable to these people, because you recognize you're imperfect, you recognize your flaws, and you work on them, and you try to be better. So I think there's a lot of good that Trump has done there. In the Barack Obama-led leadership, I think less so. I don't think Barack Obama was very transparent with some of his intentions. I think Barack Obama was a very skilled politician, but not a very transparent leader. And when it comes to speaking about records, I would love to see Obama's college records. I think there's some real question there about who he associated with and what his opinions were in college. He directly speaks in his book, I believe it's called Dreams of Our Fathers, that he sought out socialist and communist leaders while in college. So there are some questions there to be had. And I think that transparency is extremely important in leadership. And again, it brings you closer to the citizens who you're trying to represent, because we're all people. We're tired of these Colgate smile, slicked back hair, three-piece suit, perfect politicians, the Mitt Romneys of the world, who you look at and you say, there's no way that guy's real. He's so fake that no one's that perfect. No one's as perfect as that, as what he's pretending to be. We're tired of that in a bipartisan way, and that excites me.
Well, speaking specifically of transparency, and as it relates to the coming presidential election, Joe Biden has now had, I believe it was 9 women come forward with allegations, credibly so. Allegations. There was a young woman who was 14 years old when he commented on her breasts. There was the lady who said that, the staffer who said that when she was working for him, he sexually assaulted Tara Reid. He sexually assaulted her, and all of that. So we saw recently an interview with him. Mika Brzezinski did an interview with him recently, and he is now all of a sudden he is against releasing records because they could be used out of context. What does that say? That says to constituents quite a lot, I know, and I want to see if you match up to them, because just 3 or 4, almost 4 years ago, they were saying that Donald Trump won't release because he doesn't want anybody to find out what's going on, and when they got a hold of things, they took them completely out of context. So how do you feel about that whole thing? What's the situation with you? What do you think?
Right. So again, let's be clear that we're talking with Trump, we're talking about records of a private citizen, unelected at the time. With Biden, we're talking about records of a man who was in public office being paid on your tax dollars at the time. Worlds different. We need to remember that. Number 2, let's talk about what the report says. Reports have claimed, and I saw this in that Biden interview, he doesn't even deny it, that the University of Delaware records were meant to be released to the public, and then for an unknown reason, they were resealed because, again, like you said, they didn't want to be taken out of context or leveraged against him. Well, what's that tell us? That tells us that he probably has something to hide there. Now, when it comes to sexual allegations, I have a very simple standard. I want to keep my mouth shut when it comes to judgments until the evidence has been played out. I apply this to Brett Kavanaugh. I apply this to Joe Biden. What I will, so I'm not going to say whether or not I think Biden is guilty. I think that would be irresponsible. I'm not going to throw stones at him. I'm not going to defend him. I'm just going to say, follow where the evidence leads. That's all that we need to do. Now, what is interesting, though, are some of Joe Biden's own words. Good old quid pro Joe, as I like to call him. He said when speaking about Brett Kavanaugh that we should always start with the presumption that the woman is telling the truth, that the essence of what the woman is saying is true. So by Joe Biden's own standard, he should now be considered guilty until proven innocent. That's the standard he applied to Brett Kavanaugh. Again, I want to make this clear. That's not my standard. I say follow the evidence. Joe Biden says, though, follow whatever the victim says. Always believe the woman. That's what he applied to Brett Kavanaugh. And I've actually tweeted to Joe Biden, I want him to either publicly apologize to Brett Kavanaugh or publicly apply that standard to he himself, because that standard would say that now the public, at his advice, should consider him guilty until proven innocent. It's an awkward situation for old Uncle Joe to be in. So really, that's kind of my standard here is follow the evidence and let truth reign supreme, right? Let justice happen.
Yeah. One last question for you, Luke. And Bo H says his question is a 2-part question. If you win, number 1, if you win, what is the number 1 thing, according to your constituents, to begin working on? And I'll ask you, number 2, when you have addressed this as fully as you feel you should. So go ahead and address number one.
Great. Okay, so let's get off here, off to a good start with number one. I would say let's move past the defending jobs topic, which I do think is probably number one. That's what most often gets spoken to me about. However, we've kind of already spoken to that topic. So let's talk about the second one, which is the drug epidemic. I'm a big fan of changing our sentencing for those who have been convicted of crimes related to drugs in a nonviolent manner. So violent criminals are a different category we can talk about on another day. Nonviolent drug abusers who sometimes get busted for marijuana possession, which isn't even illegal in all states. And we can talk about whether or not that should be the case elsewhere. But the fact is, it's not illegal in all states. They get sent to prison for months or years. And then when they come out of prison, they've been negatively influenced by their surroundings. They can't get a job because they're viewed as a convict, and they are more likely to go back to an unproductive life of crime. That's a huge issue because we're losing members of society to something that they could be helped with. So my solution here is do the cheaper option, the more effective option, which is reform school. Send these individuals who are, again, I want to emphasize, nonviolent, to addiction reform school for various types of drug use, because that way we see promising signs in the data of people being returned to society, being empowered, and becoming once again productive members of America. So I think that's a beautiful thing that we need: drug sentencing reform. And we need to change the way that we view people who are suffering from addiction, from overdose, from these types of things. So that's a huge issue. And it's something I've talked to a lot of actually local moms and dads care a lot about this because they're seeing it influence their children. Children in schools are getting exposed to drugs at ages of 12 to 14 now. We're not even in high school when they're getting exposed. Crazy things are happening. We need it to be addressed, and we need help in this area.
Okay, part two is, do you have an issue that will be a priority? And if so, what is that?
Yeah, I mean, it would, number one is term limits. We've talked about term limits, though. We've talked about jobs. We've talked about drugs. Let's talk about another one that's huge on my heart, and it's abortion. I am never going to apologize for being pro-life, and that is something that I'm not willing to change. I'm not willing to sugarcoat so that people like me more. I think that abortion is the darkest mark on our history as a nation, the greatest sin on our history as a nation since slavery, comparable only to slavery, is abortion. And they actually go hand in hand. Those who have done their research know that abortion was started in seeking of Black genocide. Disgusting things have happened in the name of women's empowerment, and we need to define our terms here. So is a child a human or not? That's the simple question, because if the child is not a human, then we are talking about a women's rights issue. We are talking about a woman's body. If the child is a human, then we're talking about convenience-based murder. Let's not get it twisted. That's exactly what it is. So I believe that a child is a human. I believe that logic, morality, and medical data all tell us that that child is a human. And I believe that we need to defend it as such.
Excellent. So you are you are of the belief, as am I and many others, that abortion is specifically targeting minority peoples, and especially the Black community. I saw recently a video, a Black minister, and he said that of all of the 13 or so % that make up the Black community in America, only 3% are reproductive females. These are the only ones that are having babies, but they make up 43%, it was either 43 or 48% of abortions nationwide. So
it's in the 40s. I've heard that the numbers vary somewhere in the 40s of percentage of the Black population has been aborted. So right now, Blacks in America make up about 13% of our population. that number should be somewhere between 20 and 26%, but over 40% of people who are in that ethnic group have been aborted. And as someone of a mixed heritage myself, the three largest ethnic groups who make up who I am are white, Hispanic, and black. And so I take offense to that. I take offense to how abortion was implemented in America for genocide of part of my heritage. I take offense to the fact that blacks in America are about 50% represented, with the other 50% having been killed. This is terrible, and it's absolutely targeted at specific ethnicities, and we need to own that fact, and we need to stand against it.
So what specifically do you feel you can do to stand against that and to start to help the black community heal and grow even? Because it hasn't grown in 10 years, and I myself personally find that appalling. Yeah. What do you feel is something that you can do specifically to target that and to get it, just like slavery? How do we abolish that? How do we get rid of it? How do we help the black community grow and prosper?
Well, I'd say the first thing that we can do is, from a relational perspective, say, hey, look at me. I'm Hispanic and black. According to Democratic leadership, I should be voting Democrat. They think, that the leftists, they think that they own the Hispanic and black communities. It's disgusting. It's wrong. And they are actually targeting those communities. So number one, say, according to the boxes that they want to put us in, I should be something else. But guess what? That's not what I am. We each have the ability to make our own choices. So empower people with education and with awareness of who they are. Guess what? Last time I checked, I don't think with my skin color and my pigmentation. I think with my mind. I don't care what anyone looks like. I care about who they choose to be and how they choose to think. So we need to empower people with that message, and then to let them know that they have choices, that they have people who care about them. And this is somewhere where I believe, as a Christian, the church can come in and can be very active in welcoming people who have made mistakes with abortion in the past, and welcoming the idea of adoption, which many pregnancy centers and pro-life sources do. So there are some real movements to normalize those ideas and to protect people. I think that's beautiful to see.
Great. Luke Negron, thank you for joining New Right Network. You are definitely the right voice right now. My name is Mary Freeman, and I want you to join us all again.
Thank you so much, Mary.